Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers today, although we recently have been keeping spreadsheets of all of our legal and small business services. But facilitating licensing for general vendors is extremely difficult and often doesn't happen because there's a cap on general vendor licenses. For food vendors, it's much more common that we help vendors frequently, many times a month, apply for food vendor licenses.
Do you have the number in front of you as to what the food vendor?
I can get it.
Oh yeah, please let us know. And of that, how many of them are the green card, fresh card licenses that came out this year?
Yesterday I helped someone apply for a green card license. He's here, right there. Green card permit, sorry. The problem with the green card permits is you can't just sign up and get one whenever you want. Even though they're available, the health department has an extensive wait list scheme. So you can only get on the wait list when the health department opens it. And this is the problem. The wait list should just be open because there are permits available. It's the only kind of permit, or one of the only kind of permits that you can actually get. So there should be some changes to that program.
What changes do you think?
If a vendor wants to get a green card permit and the number of permits are available, which they are, you should just be able to go get one. You shouldn't have to wait until the health department opens the waiting list, because it only happens every 3 or 4 or 5 years. And it's only open for a limited amount of time. If you don't get on, or you don't know about it, then you're not able to get a permit.
Do you keep a track of the folks that do come in and are part of that wait list? So when it is open, you notify them?
Yes, we have a list. We keep track now of everyone that comes in and what they talk to us about. But it's very rare, honestly, that the green card waiting list is open. It's every I don't know, every 4 or 5 years maybe. So it's not.
What's your collaboration with not only the health department, but certainly now when we're talking about the shift between DCWP with enforcement to DSNY? What has that shift looked like for you guys? And the outreach with your vendors and notifying them of that change?
So starting with the health department, our relationship has been, I would say, tricky in a way, because we have been reaching out to them since the passage of Insurance 16, Local Law 18, trying to get a timeline and a sense of the implementation of the law. However, we were never given any information before the announcement about the public hearing that took place 24 hours before the implementation date assigned by the local law, which happened on June 30th, 2022. We have requested a lot of information about the process, however we have not received that, but afterwards, every time we reach out to them, we have to file, submit a FOIA request for any information we would like to get. So that's DOH/MH. In terms of DSNY, we have a pretty good relationship in terms of communications, understanding processes, and especially in the first several months, we have been in constant communication with them, and thankfully that was very helpful for us to explain to our members what they should expect and anticipate in terms of the enforcement shift, especially that a lot of the questions were unanswered for several months from the agency itself.
And your relationship with DCWP?
Since the transition of enforcement, it's been pretty limited. Probably we interact only in the Street Vendor Advisory Board, which has met only once since the report was released back in May 2022. And sadly, this meeting was pretty short because we had one agenda item to evaluate something that did not exist, which was the rollout of the new supervising licenses. So we had a meeting with all the board members, and the conversation was about the rollout, and the rollout hadn't happened by the time we had the meeting, so there was nothing to discuss, and that ended with that.
And so when we're talking about collaboration with DOT, especially with today's conversation with the Brooklyn Bridge component, and certainly with Councilmember Brewer and Arias's bill, what kind of conversations have you had with DOT on that?
Yeah, we talked to DOT several times about the Brooklyn Bridge. I personally went to the bridge with DOT folks and walked up and down it. That was maybe last year. And we talked about it. We testified against the proposed ban. We're thankful to Councilmember Brewer for her introduction and want to talk more with her office about how we can make that happen.
And then when we're talking about a clear path requirement given the extended areas granted by 1253, what do you think about that?
The 16-foot clear path requirement?
Yes.
Yeah, so we need to go back and measure many spots on the bridge. We did it once before, but we want to make sure that there's enough spots that are at least 16 feet in width. We acknowledge that there needs to be regulation there. Something that the city could also do is increase enforcement on the general vendor size rules. So general vendors are only allowed to occupy 8 by 3 feet of space. There are a lot of vendors that are taking more than the allowable space, and that's what's contributing to the crowding. If more enforcement was directed to that, then that would solve a lot of the problems.
What's the proper form of enforcement, and who should be the right agency in enforcing?
It should be a civilian agency. It depends, right? So for food safety, it should be the health department. You're asking whether I think the sanitation department is the right agency?
I'm just asking, in a perfect world, when we're talking about enforcement for street vendors, not only the right agency, but how would you see a proper enforcement looking like for each type of vendor when we're talking about food and or general?
Thanks, Chair, for the question. So, in terms of food and food safety, it makes all the sense that DOH is the appropriate agency to oversee that. I don't think we have any problem with them being the main agency here. But in terms of like other venue rules, in terms of time, place, and manners, in terms of all of the other citing rules, it makes sense for a civilian agency to be in charge. But the only problem we have is that regardless which agency is taken over, as long as the system is impossible to comply with, it won't matter much. I'll be very honest and very frank here. Of course, we don't want to send police officers with handcuffs and firearms to interact with the vendors. We will see that in the
مش عايزين البوليس يكون جاي معاه كلبشات ويقبض على الناس اللي بتبيع في الشارع. لازم تكون جهة مدنية هي اللي بتحاسبنا، زي وزارة الصحة أو سلامة الغذاء أو أي حاجة من الحاجات دي.
Any sort of enforcement coming out will be very excessive and very punitive towards the street vendors community.
And so just Matt, earlier when we were talking about, it was intro 1253 in regards to obstructions, when we were talking about like the bollards and putting yourself in front. So that was what I meant. So in regards to that, what do you think is the proper spacing?
Oh, I think the bill is good as it's written. I mean, I feel like vendors need to have some adequate distance allowable from the curb. It's also to clarify the rule. Because right now, it doesn't say that vendors must abut the curb. It says that vendors have to be on the part of the sidewalk that abuts the curb. No one really understands exactly what that means. If they wanted to say abut the curb, they could have just written that, but they didn't. So there was something else going on there.
بيقول لازم القانون يكون محدد، مش بيقول لك ان البتاع يكون على الرصيف، لازم يكون يحدد هو كام على بعد قد ايه من بداية الرصيف.
Sometimes there are planters placed on purpose, sometimes by building owners to kick out vendors. There are bollards placed for security. So in those instances, especially when vendors have been there before the obstruction, which happens a lot, we don't want vendors to lose their spots because it's very difficult to find a legal spot. 10 feet from every crosswalk, 20 feet from every building door. You can't vend in a bus stop, which sometimes makes whole blocks off limits. We want to give vendors a little bit extra space. So if there's an obstruction, they should be as close as possible as they can to the obstruction. They shouldn't bend in the middle of the sidewalk. They shouldn't bend up against the brick and mortar's property. They need to be on the part of the sidewalk that abuts the curb, but more clarity, either 2 feet or as close as possible.
And when you're talking about these, are you considering pedestrians or even pedestrians that have either mobility issues or even when we're talking about like parents with strollers?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a parent with a stroller. I live in West Heights, so I know all about it. I think absolutely. So there needs to be enough space for pedestrians. We think the 12-foot sidewalk with requirement, along with the rule that you have to be near the curb, is enough. And remember, it's not just we're not talking about the whole sidewalk here. We don't live in the suburbs. We live in New York City. You're walking down this sidewalk. There's going to be lots of stuff. There's going to be scaffolding. There's going to be bike racks. There's going to be city bike. There's going to be planters. There's going to be all sorts of things. There's also going to be spots where there's maybe 8 feet or 10 feet of space occupied by a vendor. So for that space, yes, the sidewalk will be narrowed for that 8 or 10 feet. And that's a reality of the city we're living in. We want to make sure that vendors aren't in the middle of the sidewalk. They need to be by the curb. But there are other things on the sidewalk besides pedestrians, and those other things, like all the stuff I mentioned, are really important for the city, just like vendors.
Okay, and then right now, how much space does here, it's gonna come like DOHMH, sorry, couldn't talk on the matter. How much do they require right now from the curb?
It's, I'm not exactly sure. Different agencies have different interpretations of that curb rule. Oath has interpreted it as 18 inches. Once I heard that the police department said 1 foot. I don't really know, which leads to this bill to try to make it clear to give a distance. So I don't know what DOHMH requires. We have to ask them.
And then I think back to my enforcement question, just because I want to know what works in your experience. And so, what do you think is a fair but effective enforcement, and what does it look like for you vendors?
مش تاكلي وانت بتتكلمي في البتاع في
Probably
الدكتور.
something that might be surprising to some people here, that a lot of our members are supportive of fair enforcement. They don't want to say we want to have a free-for-all. They don't want to say the enforcement should never exist. Enforcement and compliance is something that our members advocate for. The only problem we have in our city is that you have a set of rules that are impossible to follow. For example, the lack of license is the biggest piece. I can't obtain a license from the city to operate my business in a lawful way. And however, the same city, probably the same city agency, is sending an inspector or an officer and the same day giving me $1,000 fine for not having the license that they are now providing.
Just to add on that, perfect world. Perfect world.
Give me an example.
Licenses and permits are available. Vendor is vending without a license. They get a ticket, and the inspector says, "Go apply for your license," and the ticket will be thrown out. That would be a perfect world.
And that's very effective to both of you, you would say.
Yeah, as long as the license is
Beyond that,
available.
so beyond that, I have a license already. Let's say that's a perfect world. I already have my license, and I two worlds. One scenario, I screw up. I'm sorry, my bad. And then in the other world, I keep on screwing up. My bad, and my bad, and my bad. Up to when is enough.
Right. So there's an escalating fine schedule, which I think exists for other types of business regulations, and vendors who are violating those rules, you should cut them some slack in the beginning if they don't know or it's their first time or
Yeah,
something
that's
like
what I
that.
said. In a perfect world,